In what came as a huge blow for Vijay Mallya and Diageo, might I add, the Karnataka High Court on Friday declared that the USL share sale by UB Holdings to Diageo has been declared null and void by the court. Now, admitting the appeal filed by creditors of UBHL, the court also said that the amount deposited by UBHL will remain with the court till winding up is done. Remember, I think about 5 winding up petitions have been admitted by the Karnataka High Court against UBHL. Joining us for a legal perspective on what this will mean for Diageo is Rajat Sethi, partner at SNR Associates. Rajat, outside of the fact that this is a fairly big victory for unsecured creditors, which has now become the norm over the last couple of years, the material thing in this for most investors is that how will it jeopardize the Diageo deal? Because Diageo has made no bones about the fact that it wants control. What are your views on where it places Diageo?
Yes, Menika, I think Diageo before this order had about just over 25% of the shares in USL. So the extent of the shareholding which is impacted by this judgment seems to be around 7%. So even if obviously there will be appeals to the Supreme Court and one will wait and see what happens in the Supreme Court. But in terms of the overall impact of the deal, on the deal, there may not be a significant impact given that the definitive agreements based on what was disclosed in the market initially when the deal was announced. There are voting agreements in place which obligate the Indian promoters to vote in accordance with the instructions of Diageo. So even if from 25.02 they've gone down to say 18.02, as far as the Indian promoters are concerned, they are still holding about 11%. And together with that 18, they are still above the 25% level. In addition, there may be other contractual provisions which give them ability to purchase additional shares from the Indian promoters. But obviously that will depend on what the exact terms of the definitive agreements are. So in terms of the overall impact, it may be negligible on the deal itself. It's not that the deal is going to be invalidated, but obviously it gives everyone something to think about.
Rajat, hi, good afternoon. In that case, will there have to be a new weight which has to be found to compensate these unsecured creditors?
Yes, obviously for them it's a victory, and in terms of how they get redressed, obviously it gives them much superior negotiating leverage to get paid back what they are owed. And it would be interesting to have a look at the judgment and see how the court has determined that this constitutes some kind of that full value has not been realized, because the burden of proof would have been on the creditors to show that there is some element of dishonest intent here between the transferor and the transferee. So it's a high burden of proof, and one would wait and see how that burden has been discharged and how the court has been satisfied in this case.
Rajat, would it be fair to say that it's not yet a final victory for these unsecured creditors? It's only an interim victory, because eventually the final victory will depend on how the winding up petitions proceed from here onwards, and whether the court does eventually decide that yes, this company must be wound up and an official liquidator has to be appointed. So unless that happens, this is only an interim victory and only an interim hurdle therefore for Diageo in its ability to want to control and own a substantial portion of USL.
That's probably correct, but what it does is it brings everyone to the negotiating table to try and work out some kind of a solution as far as the unsecured creditors are concerned. So one would wait and see how the Supreme Court initially reacts, but and I'm sure that there would be an appeal against the judgment. But it does, subject to that, obviously it does bring everyone
Rajat, for a moment,
and
hypothetically, if the Supreme Court in fact maintains that this sale of shares is null and void, hypothetically, okay, what then, or what kind of situation does it then put Diageo in? And will it then force Mallya, as Anuj asked you, to find another way to discharge his dues or his group's dues towards these unsecured creditors so that this share sale is not disturbed in any fashion?
Yes, certainly it puts there's no doubt about the fact that the unsecured creditors have obtained a victory here. And it would be up to Mr. Mallya to determine how their dues are discharged. But as far as Diageo is concerned, it's certainly a hurdle in their ongoing efforts to consolidate their shareholding. But it does not seem to be an insurmountable hurdle at this point of time.
And legally, would Diageo be also at some point required to, pitch in for these unsecured creditors? I mean, has there been a precedent for something like that?
I'm not sure whether they would be formally required to pitch in, but obviously it's shares that they are interested in, and they would like to make sure that the burden is discharged to prove that it was a bona fide transaction for valuable consideration. And I'm sure that they would put in their resources to ensure that that is the conclusion which is ultimately reached by the court. And if there is a settlement discussion with the unsecured creditors, then it's certainly something which Diageo would be interested in determining how that progresses.
Rajat, Diageo has already started participating on the board of USL and in the management of USL. Now, that is predicated on their desire for control, the open offer, and their current shareholding, which is somewhere north of 25-26%. If you lose 7%, as Diageo seems to be in the position to do so, and come down to, let's say, about 19%, can somebody challenge Diageo's involvement in USL and the path that it's drawn out for USL from here onwards? Because they are doing a lot of brand rationalization in USL, and in fact, they're also trying to sell some White and McKay assets to comply with competition requirements elsewhere in the world. So can this, I mean, there are so many factors at play. Can somebody challenge Diageo's participation in USL?
So as a matter of company law, obviously they still remain the single largest shareholder. The Indian promoters are still holding about an 11% interest. And together, even with the the reduced shareholding of Diageo, they would still hold about 18 or 19%. As a company law matter, the remaining shares are widely dispersed. Obviously, among the public shareholders, if there are any significant shareholders who would like to assert their rights in this type of a situation, that obviously can happen, and one would wait and see how that plays out. But I would not think that there would be any immediate threats to Diageo's control over USL, together with the Indian promoters.
All right, Rajat, we'll thank you there. Thank you very much for joining us. I know we're all waiting for that Karnataka High Court order. We'll come back to you when we do get a chance to read those, 150, 180 pages when it's out.